The House passed a bill to bolster election security for 2020. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York then asked Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky to pass the measure, but McConnell blocked it. And then he defended his decision.
I think it's no accident that the effort to impact the elections in 2018 by the Russians and others was largely a failure. We have passed legislation appropriating up to $300 million. It's not all been spent yet. We're open to any suggestions people may have about how to improve the system.
President Trump came to Leader McConnell's defense.
McConnell is a man that knows less about Russia and Russian influence than even Donald Trump, and I know nothing.
Why isn't there more bipartisan support for these election security measures?
You would think there would be, especially in the last 2 weeks. We've seen Special Counsel Robert Muller, we've seen Director Chris Wray really make the case that Russia remains to be a threat and could still meddle in the 2020 elections or in the future. But we're seeing a real resistance from especially Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to take up any of these measures. And I think in part there's, my colleagues and others have reported that the president seems to conflate Russian collusion with Russian meddling in terms of, what we saw in the Mueller report. So I think there's some resistance to take up such measures because it might annoy the president.
And you've reported for years on campaign finance. Is McConnell also reluctant to have any kind of new regulation of elections, spending, anything to do with elections and campaigns?
I think that is definitely a concern as well. Anytime you talk about legislation that has to do with elections, he gets a little worried that campaign finance could come up. He is very much for unlimited spending. He prefers that. He prefers not disclosing donors' names. Things like that. So he doesn't want any tighter restrictions when it comes to campaign finance. This is something that he and Senator Harry Reid really are argued about for a while. So I think that is a valid concern that he has as well.
Do the Republicans pay a political price?
It's not clear that they do. I mean, the party really, to such an extent, has become a kind of a cult of Trump that issues of Russian collusion are almost automatically discounted by a lot of Republican voters. On the other hand, if you talk to national security officials, there remains a live concern that nothing has been done substantively to address the election interference that we saw last time around.
Part of that also, though, is that, and you're right, Josh, it is a live and urgent concern, right? We got an election coming up in a year and a half, and people take that very seriously. Part of it is there are certain things that have been done by the Trump administration, certain concrete steps that have been taken to at least ostensibly go after Russians, for example, for some of these things. What you haven't seen, and this is where I hear a lot of the concern coming from, is the president himself deliver a message of accountability to the Russians on this issue. And so while people that you talk to inside the White House will point to various briefings and things that people have done and this and that and the other, the president hasn't done that. His voice carries weight, and that's where you see some frustration from people who say the president himself needs to come out and be more forceful about that because he's the commander-in-chief.
Is it deflating for Democrats so soon after the Mueller testimony to see so little action?
I'm not sure Democrats really expected that they were going to get much help from Senator McConnell on something like this. I mean, his position on these kinds of things has been pretty clear. He's been very resistant on almost anything that is passed by the new House Democratic majority. And it's almost as if you would have to create a compromise environment inside the Senate rather than having it come over from the House. So does it make them angry? Yes, it does, because I think that they agree that there is a serious problem, and in one way or another it has to be dealt with.
And McConnell was quite angry this week, taking to the Senate floor to defend his reputation after some critics on the left said he was a Russian asset. That was some of the terminology used.
It's as angry as we've seen Senator McConnell in a long, long time, and he laid out chapter and verse of all of the things that he said rebut that characterization of him.
And yet, didn't move forward with these new plans. And I think one of the things he was objecting to, he's been dubbed Moscow Mitch, I think was the objection by a number of Democrats. That was actually mentioned on the debate stage, I think, by Julian Castro. So I think the kind of Democratic needling has also gotten under his skin a little bit.